Your posture is not poor. It is contracted around a wound you were never taught to release. This is the first thing to understand, and it changes everything. The way you hold your body in space right now, the slight curl of the shoulders forward, the compressed chest, the pelvis tucked under, and the breath sitting shallow in the upper lungs. This is not a habit born of laziness or distraction. It is the architecture of a nervous system that learned, somewhere along the way, to protect you from a threat that may no longer exist. And the cost of that architecture compounds daily in ways that go far beyond posture. It lives in the quality of your attention. It lives in the flatness that settles over desire. It lives in the peculiar exhaustion of wanting something deeply and feeling, underneath the wanting, a subtle but absolute certainty that the wanting will not be answered. The ancient world knew this erosion by a different name. Egyptian priests entering the inner sanctuaries of Karnak and Luxor were not simply performing ritual theater when they straightened their spines, lifted their sternum, and opened their arms into specific geometric alignments. Before standing in the presence of the Nita, the divine principles they invoked, the Vedic rishis sitting in Sukhasana, the easy seat of meditation, were not choosing a comfortable position. They were choosing a specific electrical configuration for the body, one that the Sanskrit texts describe as allowing prana to move without obstruction through the central channel, the sushumna, along the spine. The Hermetic initiates working within the tradition, attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, understood this through the principle that became one of the 7 foundational laws of the Kybalion: as above, so below, and by necessary extension, as within, so without. The inner geometry creates the outer reality. The body is the instrument through which intention is either transmitted or trapped. Then in 2003, a neuroscientist named Stephen Porges published the theoretical framework that would spend the next 2 decades reshaping how researchers, therapists, and trauma specialists understood the human nervous system. His polyvagal theory did something extraordinary. It gave a mechanistic, biological language to what the ancients had mapped through the language of energy and ritual. It explained with clinical precision why the body's physical state is not a consequence of your psychological condition, but its primary cause. And in 2012, a Harvard social psychologist named Amy Cuddy and her colleague Dana Carney demonstrated in peer-reviewed research that holding a specific expansive posture for 2 minutes measurably altered the hormonal environment of the body, reducing cortisol, the primary stress hormone, and increasing testosterone, the hormone associated with confidence, agency, and directed force. 2 minutes. A measurable chemical transformation in a window shorter than most people spend deciding what to watch before bed. What you are about to receive is not information about posture. Information does not move anything. What you are about to receive is the restoration of a position your body already knows in its deepest cellular memory. A position that reorganizes your nervous system from the inside out, opens the channel through which focused desire becomes an actual force in the world, and returns you to a state that 3 of humanity's oldest wisdom traditions independently identified as the prerequisite for receiving anything that is real and lasting. Inside the body, there is a war most people are silently losing, and it is not a war against the world. It is a war between 2 branches of the autonomic nervous system, each competing for dominance in every single moment of your waking life. The sympathetic branch prepares you for emergency. It floods you with cortisol and adrenaline. It pulls blood away from the digestive organs and the prefrontal cortex. It tightens the hip flexors, shortens the breath, clamps the jaw, and collapses the thoracic spine into a forward protective curl. The parasympathetic branch does the opposite. It governs repair, digestion, deep perception, creative intelligence, and what Porges described as the social engagement system, the neural networks through which you actually connect to other people, to your own vision, and to what many traditions would simply call the field. The vagus nerve is the primary architecture of this second branch, and it is the most anatomically important structure in this entire conversation. It is the longest cranial nerve in the body, a wandering neural highway. The word vagus itself comes from the Latin for wandering, that travels from the brainstem down through the throat, branches into the lungs and heart, continues into the digestive system, and loops back up to the face in the larynx. When the vagus nerve is toned and active, its influence slows the heart rate, deepens the breath, and, critically, signals the entire nervous system that the threat has passed. You are safe to be intelligent again. You are safe to be perceptive again. You are safe to be generative. Here is what collapses vagal tone before you even realize it has happened. When the thoracic spine rounds forward, as it does in chronic sympathetic activation, it compresses the vagal pathway at the point where it threads through the chest cavity. The psoas muscle, the deep hip flexor that connects the lumbar vertebrae to the femur, and is sometimes called the soul muscle because of its relationship to the fight or flight response, remains in a state of chronic contraction that neurophysiologist Liz Koch documented in her foundational work on the psoas as a continuous sensory organ, not merely a mechanical one. The diaphragm, held under the compressed ribcage, cannot descend fully, and because the vagus nerve is mechanically entangled with the respiratory rhythm, shallow breath is both a symptom and a perpetuator of sympathetic dominance. When Amy Cuddy and Dana Carney measured the hormonal effects of 2-minute posture holds in their 2010 study published in Psychological Science, what they were observing at the endocrine level was downstream evidence of a vagal shift. The body, held in an open and expanded geometry, was beginning to persuade itself that it was no longer in danger. The work of neuroscientist Martin Paulus at the Laureate Institute for Brain Research has since deepened this understanding, demonstrating that interoception, the brain's perception of the body's internal state, is the primary mechanism through which the nervous system updates its threat assessment. The geometry of the body is a form of communication the nervous system trusts completely. 3,000 years before Porges named the vagus nerve, the builders of the Egyptian mystery tradition were encoding the same knowledge into the posture of Osiris, the god depicted standing with his spine perfectly vertical, his chest open, his arms crossed at the sternum in what Egyptologists have catalogued as the position of resurrection. Not coincidentally, the resurrection they were depicting was not only metaphysical, it was physiological. The priests who practiced these alignments as part of the Kemetic tradition understood the body as a temple, and the spine as the Jed pillar, the hieroglyphic symbol of stability and raised life force that some scholars, including John Anthony West in his analysis of Schwaller de Lubitsch's work at Luxor, have interpreted as a direct representation of the vertebral column and its relationship to the animating principle of the human being. In the Vedic tradition, the same insight was embedded in the concept of Brahmarandra, the crown aperture, and in the protocol for preparing the body for pranayama. Patanjali, in the Yoga Sutras compiled around 400 CE, devoted an entire limb of practice to asana, physical posture, before breath regulation was even attempted. This was not incidental sequencing. The ancient teachers understood that without the correct geometry, the breath practices would simply distribute agitation more efficiently. The spine had to be organized first, because the spine was the instrument through which what the Vedic tradition called Shakti, the animating creative force, could move vertically through the body without deflection. The Taoist tradition in China developed this understanding through the system of Qigong and the concept of Wu Ji, the primordial emptiness from which all things arise. The Wu Ji standing posture, one of the foundational positions in internal martial arts and Taoist meditation, requires the practitioner to stand with the crown of the head floating upward, the tailbone relaxed and slightly weighted, the sternum soft, and the arms hanging in a specific geometry that mirrors almost precisely what modern biomechanics identifies as the natural anatomical resting position of the glenohumeral joint. The Taoist masters call this holding the body between heaven and earth. They were describing the same polarity that Porges would later map as the axis between sympathetic mobilization and parasympathetic rest. The Hermetic tradition, working in Alexandria in the first centuries of the Common Era and drawing from both Egyptian and Greek sources, articulated the governing principle most directly in what became the Emerald Tablet, the text attributed to Hermes Trismegistus. That which is below is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is above, and that which is above is like that which is below. Applied to the body, this principle is not metaphor. It is instruction. The geometry of the physical form mirrors and generates the geometry of the inner state, what Porges discovered with his mapping of the vagal hierarchy, what Cuddy observed in her hormonal data, what Koch felt in her hands as she worked with the psoas. All of it was a rediscovery of the language that the ancient world had never lost, only encoded into forms that the modern mind had not yet learned to read. There is a reason the usual approaches to this keep falling short, and it is not personal failure. The common enemy is a nervous system that has been organized around contraction for so long that it experiences expansion as unfamiliar, even suspicious. People try affirmations, and the words evaporate before they land. They try visualization, and the images feel hollow, disconnected from any genuine felt sense of possibility. They try meditation, and find that the body brings its chronic agitation directly into the silence. The problem is never the technique. The problem is that the body has not yet been prepared to receive what the technique is offering. If that recognition lands somewhere in you, if you have felt the frustration of reaching for transformation and finding the door locked from the inside, then the special guide Healing in Motion 22 Somatic Cycles, Release Trauma, Restore Flow and Return to Creation was built for exactly where you are. This is not a breathwork manual or a movement tutorial. It is a 22-cycle protocol that works directly with the nervous system through somatic positioning and held alignment to release what is stored in the tissues, restore the vagal tone that makes genuine perception possible, and return the body to the state from which focused desire becomes an actual creative force rather than a prolonged ache. The people who have moved through it have shared what happened for them, and those real accounts are waiting for you in the first pinned comment below this video. The link to access the guide is there as well, but it is available for a limited time only. Go there now, read what others have experienced, and take the next step with the full weight of your own readiness behind it. The science did not arrive to explain the ancient wisdom. It arrived to confirm what the body had always known. Stephen Porges published the polyvagal theory in 2003, but the mechanism he described had been operating in human tissue for hundreds of millions of years. Long before there were names for nerves or hormones or autonomic states, what his framework gave the modern world was a clinical map of something the initiated had always touched directly through practice, through posture, through breath, through the deliberate reorganization of the physical body as a first act of transformation rather than a last resort. And in the decade following Cuddy's 2012 TED Talk, which drew from her peer-reviewed work with Dana Carney, a wave of convergent research began arriving from entirely separate disciplines, each one landing like another stone in a mosaic that had always been complete, only waiting for enough pieces to make the whole pattern visible. Bessel van der Kolk, the Dutch psychiatrist and trauma researcher whose landmark 2014 work, The Body Keeps the Score, synthesized 30 years of clinical evidence, stated plainly what the Vedic rishis had encoded in asana practice, and what the Egyptian priests had embedded in their ritual alignment. The body is not a vehicle the mind drives. It is the primary site where experience is stored, where safety or danger is continuously assessed, and where transformation either begins or does not begin at all. His research demonstrated that trauma, understood not as a memory, but as a physiological pattern held in muscle, fascia, and autonomic regulation, does not respond to narrative therapy alone. It responds to the body being moved, reorganized, and held in new geometries long enough for the nervous system to update its map. The fascia researcher Tom Myers, whose work on anatomy trains has reshaped how physical therapists and movement practitioners understand the body's connective tissue matrix, demonstrated that the fascial lines running through the body are continuous, tensional structures that transmit mechanical force and, critically, proprioceptive information from the soles of the feet to the base of the skull. What this means in the language of the present conversation is that posture is not local. The collapse in the thoracic spine does not stay in the thoracic spine. It propagates through the deep front line of fascia, compressing the psoas, tilting the pelvis, restricting the diaphragm, and altering the tension pattern at the base of the skull, where the vagal nucleus has its origin. The entire body is a single continuous instrument, and its tuning is either coherent or it is not. Epigenetic research, most notably the work emerging from Bruce Lipton's early cellular biology findings and later formalized through the field of behavioral epigenetics, has established that the gene expression of cells is not fixed by heredity alone, but is continuously regulated by the biochemical environment of the cell, which is itself determined by the neurochemical state of the organism. Sustained sympathetic activation bathes the cells in cortisol and suppresses the genetic expression associated with repair, regeneration, and what might be called receptivity. Sustained parasympathetic activation does the reverse. The ancient claim that the body can be restored to a state of original wholeness through deliberate physical practice is not metaphor. It is a description of epigenetic regulation stated in the language available at the time. Now, the protocol. Not as instruction, but as restoration. Your body will recognize this. Stand with your feet hip-width apart and feel the four corners of each foot pressing into the ground with equal weight. This is not a metaphor for grounding. This is the activation of the mechanoreceptors in the plantar fascia that send proprioceptive signals upward through Tom Myers's superficial backline, beginning the process of postural reorganization from the foundation. Let your knees soften, not bent, but unlocked, so the weight drops through the joint rather than being held above it. Now attend to the pelvis. This is the step most people skip and the one that makes everything else possible. Gently release the tucked position. The chronic sympathetic activation holds the pelvis in, and allow it to find a very slight anterior tilt. Not exaggerated, simply neutral, so that the natural lumbar curve returns without effort. The psoas, that deep hip flexor that Liz Koch described as a continuous sensory organ, begins to lengthen the moment the pelvis finds this neutral position. You may feel something release in the lower belly, a softening that is not muscular, but something older and less named. Let the spine rise from that released pelvis. Do not pull the shoulders back. Do not force the chest open. Simply allow the thoracic vertebrae to stack one upon another, and let the rib cage lift slightly away from the pelvis as though there is space between each rib. The sternum rises, and as it does, the vagal pathway through the chest cavity, which was compressed in the forward curl, begins to open. You are not creating a new shape. You are removing an old compression. Let the arms hang from the shoulders with the palms facing slightly forward, as though offering something to the space in front of you. This is the position that Taoist Wu Ji practice calls holding the ball, and it is also the anatomical resting position of the glenohumeral joint that biomechanics identifies as the configuration of minimum tension. Feel the broadness across the collarbones. Let the throat be soft. Let the jaw be unhinged. Let the back of the skull float upward very gently from the crown, as though a thread is drawing you toward the sky. So the cervical vertebrae decompress and the suboccipital muscles at the base of the skull, where the vagal nerve complex originates, release their chronic grip. Now breathe. Inhale through the nose for 4 counts, feeling the breath descend all the way into the lower lobes of the lungs, so the belly and the lower ribs expand before the chest does. Hold gently for 1 count. Exhale through the nose or softly through the mouth for 6 counts, letting the breath leave completely without forcing it. The extended exhale activates the vagal brake. The mechanism Porge is identified as the means by which the parasympathetic system asserts its calming influence over the heart rate. Do this breath cycle 4 times without moving. Then hold the position in stillness for 2 full minutes. Set a timer. Do not adjust. Do not fidget. Let the body remain in this geometry while the nervous system does what it has always known how to do. When given the opportunity, it recalibrates, it resets, it returns. Her name is Nadia, and she was 41 years old when she sat down across from a somatic therapist for the first time and said that she had spent the last 3 years trying everything, and everything had failed to move her. She meant failed to move her emotionally, but even as she said it, she noticed that she was also describing something literal. She sat in her chair the way she had sat in every chair for as long as she could remember, with her shoulders drawn forward, her arms crossed over her sternum, her breath living exclusively in the upper chest, shallow and effortful, and never quite satisfying. The therapist noticed it too, and instead of asking Nadia to talk about her childhood, she asked her to stand up. What followed was 15 minutes of the simplest physical instruction Nadia had ever received. Stand here. Release there. Let this. Allow that. And then the 2-minute hold. Standing in the open position, palms forward, spine vertical, sternum lifted, breath descending fully for the first time in what felt like years. Nadia described the moment, later, as bizarre in its ordinariness. Nothing dramatic happened. No vision. No revelation, no sudden weeping. What happened was that somewhere around the 90-second mark, her body simply stopped arguing. The chronic vigilance that had been the background tone of her entire adult life quieted, not dramatically, not permanently, but measurably, in a way she could feel with complete clarity in the same tissues that had been holding the argument. She drove home that evening and noticed that the sky above the freeway was a color she had seen 10,000 times and somehow never registered. She noticed that her hands on the steering wheel were not gripping. She noticed that something she had been wanting for a long time, a creative project she had been unable to approach for 3 years, was sitting in the front of her mind with an energy attached to it that was not anxiety. She did not name it hope, because hope felt too precarious. She named it access. The door she had been standing outside of had not opened. She had simply returned to a place in herself where she remembered that she had a key. The obstacle is not weakness, the obstacle is loyalty, and it is one of the most intelligent survival mechanisms the human nervous system has ever developed. When the body has organized itself around contraction as a response to genuine threat, whether that threat was a childhood environment that was unsafe, a prolonged period of loss or failure, or simply the cumulative weight of a culture that never once taught you what your nervous system actually needs, the contraction becomes an identity. It becomes the shape of someone who is being careful. It becomes the architecture of someone who has learned that expansion invites exposure, and exposure has historically meant pain. This is the paradox that makes the protocol feel threatening before it feels liberating. Opening the chest, lifting the sternum, letting the palms face forward and the throat go soft. These are not just physical acts. They are signals to a nervous system that has been on guard for a very long time, signals that say the guard is no longer needed. And for many people, in the first few days of practice, that signal arrives as discomfort. Not physical pain, but the particular unease of unfamiliarity, the sense that something is being let go. That was, until this moment, functioning as protection. The cultural conditioning layers itself directly on top of this physiological pattern. Western modernity has valorized contraction as productivity. The hunched posture of someone leaning into a screen for 14 hours is coded as effort, as dedication, as the shape of someone taking their life seriously. Expansion, by contrast, the open chest and the released jaw and the breath that actually descends, has been culturally associated with leisure at best and with naivety or vulnerability at worst. The collapse that Porges would identify as sympathetic dominance is not only a nervous system state, it is a social performance of seriousness, and dismantling it means disagreeing with a cultural story that has been reinforced since childhood. The transmutation is not dramatic. It does not require the dismantling of the whole story at once. It requires only that you practice the 2-minute hold once today, in a private space where no performance is required of you, not to prove anything, not to override anything, simply to give your nervous system one honest experience of what it already knows, and then once tomorrow, and the day after. The physiological effects Cuddy observed in her research did not require belief. They required only the body held in the position for the duration. Your nervous system will do the rest without being asked. What the journey through this practice ultimately reveals is something the modern world consistently underestimates, that restoration is not self-improvement. It is the recognition of an original state that was temporarily obscured, not permanently lost. The yogis of the Vedic tradition were not teaching people how to become something new. They were teaching the body to remember what it had always been, before the world taught it to contract. Bessel van der Kolk closed one of his most widely cited lectures with a statement that carries the weight of 3 decades of clinical work behind it. The single most important issue for traumatized people is to find a way to become embodied, to tolerate the feelings and sensations of the body, to become embodied, not to transcend the body, not to override it with willpower or intention, but to return to it, to inhabit it fully, to make of it what it was always designed to be, which is the first and most immediate instrument of contact between the self and the world. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke, writing in his letters to a young poet in 1903, placed his finger on the same essential truth from the opposite direction. Perhaps all the dragons in our lives are princesses who are only waiting to see us act, just once, with beauty and courage. The contracted posture, the sympathetic dominance, the flatness that settles over desire, these are not the evidence of a broken person. They are a nervous system waiting for one act of physical courage. The protocol is that act. The position is not a technique. It is the body's original posture of receiving, and every tradition that has ever pointed toward it understood that the point was never the posture itself. The point was what the posture returns you to, a state of open, rooted, clear-channeled aliveness from which what you desire and what you are capable of are no longer separated by the architecture of a wound. This is biological restoration, not optimization, not self-hacking. A return. If what you have heard today has moved something in you, even a small and quiet thing, do not let that movement pass without marking it. Press the like button right now, because doing so tells this work that it has found someone ready to receive it, and it helps carry this into the hands of everyone else who is standing in front of the same locked door. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notification bell, because what is being built here is a body of knowledge that compounds, each piece building on the last, and you do not want to arrive late to any part of it. In the comments below this video right now, type the words, "I am returning to myself," not as a wish, as a declaration. Say it in the first person, in the present tense, and let the body you are sitting in right now hear it as the statement of fact that it is quafto. Share this video with one person in your life who you sense is standing in that same contraction, carrying that same quiet exhaustion of wanting something and feeling, underneath the wanting, a ceiling they cannot name. You may not say anything to them when you share it. The video will say what needs to be said. And when this ends, click the video waiting on your screen. It continues this work from exactly where you are now. This channel exists to return you to yourself, one ancient truth at a time, as many times as it takes, for as long as you are willing to keep coming back.